Good morning and welcome to Platform X and welcome to the first annual edition of Ireland's Innovation Index. Delighted to welcome you here this morning. My name is Dermot. I'm the CEO of IRDG and delighted to be talking about the Innovation Index this morning.
Good morning, my name is Ken Hardy. On behalf of KPMG, I'd like to thank you all for attending this morning. I lead our incentives group and I'll bring you through the detail of our survey this morning.
So just a couple of things on our agenda this morning. So we're going to walk you through the survey. We're going to walk you through the detail of the survey and the key points. Ken's going to take you through that in a minute. We're going to look at some comparisons, some international comparisons, and see how Ireland compares against the UK and how it compares against some of our really important European peers. And we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion at the end after we bring you some of the recommendations and some interesting conclusions that have come out of this report. Just for housekeeping, there is a Q&A button on the bottom of the screen, so please feel free to drop your questions into that. We'll probably take about 25 minutes to go through our main presentation, so plenty of time for the Q&A, and we will get you out of here before 10:30 this morning. So research and innovation is a really important issue for the economy. It drives economic prosperity. It's absolutely key to meeting the challenges of economic progress and solving the problems we have with sustainability and digital transformation and dealing with our 21st century challenges. So we undertook this survey. We kicked it off as a process back in April. We ran it for 3 weeks into the middle of May and I spent the last few weeks crunching the numbers. So I'm going to hand over to Ken and Ken's going to take you through the detail of those survey results.
Thanks, Dermot. So in total, we had 394 respondents. So a fantastic response, and thank you all who are attending today who have responded. For those attending who haven't completed our survey, you'll have an opportunity in the future. As Dermot said, this will be an annual survey, and it'll be interesting to see over the coming years the relativity year to year. So out of those 394 respondents, where did they come from? Well, 64% of you were Irish owned and 36% foreign owned. So very typical of our client base and indeed, I would think, Dermot, of the IRDG membership. So a very representative sample and a very good cross-section, I think, of Irish industry. Within those organisations, 57% of you had 1 to 10 people conducting R&D, 25% of you had 11 to 50, 12% 51 to 250, and 5% of you greater than 1,000 people doing R&D. So an excellent cross-section. What businesses were you in? 4 main segments represented, and again, very typical of our client base and IRDG membership. 18% of you were in the engineering and technology space carrying on your R&D. 17% in the software ICT sector, 15% in the health and well-being space, medical devices, and the balance in manufacturing, pharma and biotech. So a lot of responses in a very good cross-section of Irish industry with lots of people doing R&D, which gives us confidence of the statistical validity of our findings. Moving on, looking at the key results, and I'll go into these in a little bit more detail in the slides ahead. 79% of you believe that an enhanced 50% R&D tax credit for green or sustainable technology would encourage you to enter that space. And that's incredibly important. We'll talk later about Impact 2030, and we'll talk about the government white paper on enterprise, and decarbonisation is an integral part of that. 4 out of 5 of you expect to increase your investment in RD&I over the coming 3 years. And that is a fantastic validation, I think, of our confidence in the future of the Irish economy and of the importance of RD&I to that growth in our economy. And I'll talk a little bit more about that also. 69% believe that the Irish R&D grant and tax support systems compare equally or favourably to other jurisdictions. And that's incredibly important for government policy. the majority and significant majority of you believe that we have a fit for purpose, albeit that there are improvements that can be made to the support mechanisms, and I'll brief you on some of that later also. 52% of you noted that RD&I funding contributed positively to the creation of employment, and that's one of the tenets or reasons why we have these support networks. So looking in a little bit more detail, 80% of Irish companies conducting RD&I expect to increase their investment in this space over the next 3 years. Only 4% of respondents expected to decrease investment in RD&I. So looking out for the next 3 years, a very positive outlook for increased investment in this important space. However, everything isn't perfect, and we need to recognize, I think, the barriers to that investment. And 45% of you called out that the amount of time you commit to preparing your R&D tax credit claims, preparing your R&D grant applications and other support applications is a barrier to you. 35% of you felt that the process was cumbersome. 35% of you also felt that the capacity to retain or to attract new RD&I professionals was an issue. 20% of you were concerned at the myriad of reliefs that are available and the complexity of navigating that landscape. Moving on to how MNCs feel Ireland compares to other countries, and over 2/3 of MNCs conducting R&D in Ireland believe that our grant and tax supports compare equally or favourably to other jurisdictions. And I think that's really important. In this era of increasing mobility of R&D investment, corporates and multinationals in particular have great opportunity to invest in their chosen locations and to move to better locations. So the fact that the 69% believe that we compare well to other jurisdictions suggests that we're competing well and we're attracting and retaining our fair share of investment. 50% of respondents felt that if we didn't have a credit system, that at least half of their R&D investment would go elsewhere. And that's an important bellwether to remember. Moving on then to the impact of R&D funding. R&D is a number of you recognize that R&D is a significant contributor to the Irish economy, with 52% of you saying that R&D funding has supported increasing or retaining employment, while almost 2/3 say it has allowed them to conduct more R&D activity. And what this slide doesn't say, and what I think is important to recognize, is this is about the impact of R&D funding in specific areas. The multiplier effect, or the impact, the ripple effect that this actual investment in RD&I activities has on the greater economy can't be underestimated. So all those suppliers of products and services and consumables into this sector equally benefit from the investment that you and your colleagues are making in RD&I.
We asked a question specifically about sustainability in the report. We're all enjoying the glorious weather, but we're all aware that the planet essentially is on fire. Sustainability is the key challenge of our age. It's everywhere in government policy. The whole issue of decarbonisation, of building sustainable products. We can see from the information that's available, and this isn't really easy to put together, that we are underinvesting in sustainable and green technologies in Ireland as a whole. We have an underdeveloped sector here. There's a huge business opportunity as well as an existential reason to be investing more. So when we asked you if an enhanced tax credit would encourage more companies to invest and spend more in green and climate technologies, the overwhelming response essentially was yes, with a smaller group saying that they were not sure, and essentially a very small group saying it wouldn't. So 80% of companies would invest more with more support. We also did a couple of comparisons, looking internationally, comparing Ireland against the UK and looking at how we're performing against our peers. The UK is an important comparison for historical reasons. You can drive less than 90 minutes up the road from where we're sitting here in Dublin, and you can benefit from being in the EU from a business perspective and being from the UK, and also avail of UK supports. And we've seen lots of examples of Irish companies who've set up in the UK and have set up research and innovation in the UK. There's a number of advantages that the UK has over us in relation to salary, in relation to claims timing, in relation to SME supports. So Ireland has a narrower definition around the sort of claims you can make around salary than the UK. They have enhanced supports for SMEs in terms of the amounts that they can claim relative to Ireland, although some of that is changing with the recent spring economic statement, which Ken took a rather detailed read through there fairly recently. Critically, from a business perspective, the UK allows you to look back 24 months in relation to making claims, as opposed to making claims only looking back for 12 months here. They also have shorter audit windows and simplified claims processes. So when we look back at that issue, which is a challenge for nearly half the companies that we surveyed, where over 45% of companies said that the bureaucracy and the complexity associated with making claims is a challenge. A simplified regime in the UK and some other countries leads to a challenge in competitive terms for Irish business. Going beyond Ireland, we looked at the global innovation performance. So there's two indexes here. There's the European Innovation Scorecard and the Global Innovation Index, which have been measuring innovation over a number of years. And what we've seen over those years is we've seen Ireland has performed well up to about 2017. But since 2017, we've declined on both of those indexes up to last year, where we improved on the European index, but continued our decline on the global index. So just looking at the global index for a second, what we see is back in 2016, we were 7th in the world. By 2017, where we're looking at this graph, essentially we had fallen to 10th. And over the number of years, what we see is Ireland's progression out of this index. From 7th to 10th, and actually then out of the index in total from 2020 onwards as we disappear down to 19th. So that's a significant fall. In our European rankings, we had continued to decline over a number of years. We're behind the innovation leaders. And some really interesting points from the EU's barometer surveys is that the innovation leaders are accelerating further ahead of us, and the innovators who are behind us are catching up on us. So those who are the best innovators in Europe, their performance is increasing faster than our performance, and other countries are catching up on us. So it's a cause for concern. When we dug into those numbers, what we saw was there's really a gap of 2 billion in funding for Irish research and innovation. And we break that down. So there was 4.7 billion spent on research and innovation funding in Ireland in 2021, which is the last year we have full figures. If we were to be spending at the rate of those really strong innovation leaders, we would be spending 6.9 billion a year. And of that, the government would need to significantly increase its spending as part of that. So almost doubling its spending from 950 million to 1.8 billion. And we'd look to see increased business investment in research and innovation at the same time. So one of the things that the government has done recently is the creation of the white paper on enterprise, which is starting its implementation. I'm going to hand you back to Ken, and Ken's going to talk to what's in that white paper on enterprise and what are the implications for Ireland.
It's a very accessible document. It's a good read if you're into government white papers. But it does set out aspirations for where we see the enterprise culture in Ireland going. And I think what's important to note is that there's something in there for everyone, I think. It recognises the importance of the indigenous sector, but also recognises the importance of RD&I, of the importance of foreign direct investment and the contribution that multinational corporations make. So there's a number of strategies set out in it, and they respect both indigenous and foreign direct investment. However, to my mind, the most important call out in that enterprise paper is the ambition the Irish government has for business expenditure on R&D to double between 2022 and 2030. And why wouldn't they? It's you and your organisations that they want you to spend your money on with respect to R&D. But their contribution to that will be a larger amount incurred on R&D credits, a larger amount incurred on R&D grants available through Enterprise Ireland or through IDA. So currently, the government support us in our R&D activities to the tune of about 750 million euros per annum on R&D tax credits. That number is going to have to double between now and 2030 if businesses are to be encouraged to increase their investment in R&D and to achieve the targets. In the white paper, the government set out 7 areas or priorities, and they set out in the document their strategy around each of these. The 7 are, and none of them are surprising, and indeed Dermot has mentioned a number of them already. First priority area is integrating decarbonisation and net zero emissions. Second priority, placing digital transformation at the heart of enterprise policy. Number 3, advancing Ireland's FDI and trade value proposition. Number 4, strengthening the Irish-owned exporting sector. Number 5, enabling local trading sectors to thrive. Number 6, stepping up enterprise innovation. And finally, number 7, building on strengths and opportunities. And within our Innovation Index report, there is commentary on this white paper. It encourages all to be innovative, and I think it encourages us all to be ambitious. But the proof of the pudding, as they say, will be to see, have the government prioritise the right areas? Are they willing to support those areas with real strategy and real money in a sustainable fashion? And will business follow that lead? And time will tell. Conclusions and recommendations, Dermot. I think we see a number of factors, but everything I think comes back to key themes.
Yeah. So I'll almost take our conclusions, almost simplify them down to almost 3 S's: spend more, simplify all the processes, and sustainability. Right. And that's a very gross simplification in relation to it, but there's a clear funding gap, both from government, and particularly when you look at the percentage of our not the monetary terms, but the percentages we're spending. So, a country like Denmark or Finland is spending 0.8% of its GDP on research and innovation. Ireland, and we're comparing modified domestic demand, the GNI star, rather than taking the slightly distorted GDP figures that Ireland has. Ireland's spending 0.46%. So in real terms, we're spending almost half what these leading innovator countries are spending at government level. And we all know we've reached an unusual point in our economy where we actually have money, right? Yeah. So it's how we spend that, and how we spend that for our future in medical technologies, in sustainability technologies, in food supplies and so on, will help that. But yeah, it's probably worth digging into the conclusions in a little bit more detail.
And Dermot, when we did the analysis and saw that €2 billion gap, when I look at the statistics on RD&I, or indeed R&D tax credits, the amount in claim and the number of claimants seems to have plateaued.
Yeah.
So in order, we have a 2 billion funding gap to meet the targets that the government have set for us all and for the betterment of the economy. Yet there has been a stalling in number of claimants and the amount claimed, and similarly, I think with direct R&D grants, a plateau reached. So do you think there's an opportunity to improve the process, reduce those barriers that I spoke about?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there. So if you we have consistent feedback in different groups in terms of the challenges they face, right? So you talk to you talk to anybody across any part of the country, talent is an issue, time is an issue. We have companies who are engaged in R&D who are not claiming R&D tax credits because they're concerned about the complexity of the process, they're concerned about audits, various other things. So they have less money to spend, less money to invest in research and innovation, and less money to put back into their companies. And this is particularly a problem and a challenge for smaller companies. We've seen some of the recent changes in the last Finance Act have brought forward some of the cash payments and so on. But we think there's some significant things that we can do that would significantly enhance that in terms of, finance attempted to bring in a 35% credit for small companies. That proved to be impossible under state aid rules. So that hasn't happened. We think it's, by increasing the percentage claim on the first million of R&D, that would effectively have the same result. By broadening the definition slightly in terms of, rather than wholly and exclusively look at, in the carrying on, we'd probably be able to bring things like rent back into the system. So there's a lot of real practical things and practical challenges that need to be done to raise the game.
And can I remind everyone of the chat function? We have 5 questions on my iPad here, and we'll get to them, but I'd encourage you, if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat and they'll pop up here on my iPad. Just to your point, in KPMG's pre-budget submission, which will be going into the Minister shortly, we absolutely call for an improvement for the credit with respect to SMEs. The UK has enhanced their regime and enhanced the amount of relief that they give to their SME sector. In fairness, the government did try and implement what would have been an excellent solution, but that fell foul of state aid. But there is absolutely opportunity and an ability to improve access to the credit, particularly for our SMEs. I also think the acceleration of 3 payments currently, as set out, 50%, 30% and 20%, that can be accelerated into 1 payment. That's the regime in the UK, for example. It's only timing difference, but cash is king, particularly to SMEs. I see it as very little cost to the Exchequer. It's something we've been calling for a number of years, and I think it'll be really, really impactful. Just moving on with respect to our conclusions, and you mentioned on your slide about a 50% credit for green technologies. The government strategy, their white paper and enterprise, number 1 on that is decarbonisation. The amount of RD&I going on in Ireland with respect to decarbonisation, certainly from a KPMG perspective, from an R&D credit perspective, we don't see a huge amount of that. It must be a significant opportunity for our clients and indeed for your members.
I think it's a massive opportunity, right? So we have if we think about offshore, all right, and we think about everything that goes with that, not just the actual turbines themselves, the servicing of them, the communications of them. We have member companies who are servicing lots of wind farms in the North Atlantic, connecting them, connectivity, building components and other elements, managing the data that's coming out of these, managing demand. So the numbers of support technologies and advanced technologies that is needed to create a decarbonised economy is going to be quite phenomenal over the next number of years. Everybody's also going to have to look at all their existing products and services.
Sure.
So, as simple as when you go into a shop and you see, plastic covering on your apples, and that's becoming it's becoming a cardboard smaller. So everybody's products and services are going to have to evolve as part of that. And we're all going to be conscious of what we're doing. So the opportunity is massive. And the reality is, if we don't make those moves, we will be paying somebody else for them, because we will be using these technologies, which or whether, but it depends on, are those technologies going to be not just manufactured in Ireland, but actually invented in Ireland, created, thought up, designed, delivered and implemented. And that's really where incentive supports, the R&D tax credit and supports from Enterprise Ireland and IDA are absolutely critical, is making sure that we own a key stake in that intellectual property.
And one of our survey questions touched on that specifically, and 45% of respondents felt that their R&D focus in the near term would be around existing products and processes and systems and improving them. So obviously decarbonisation and integral part of that. And 40% of respondents thereafter would be looking at new products and processes. So the opportunity isn't necessarily with that basic research, but it's with the applied research improving existing.
It's everywhere,
Yeah.
right? It's absolutely everywhere, and you know, it's dominating business conversations. One of the things I've said about what we do in IRDG is that everything has a part. Everything we do ties into sustainability. We have a sustainability leaders group. We have lots of people meeting, talking about those things. So it's critical across the economy, and we can see global leaders, companies like Logitech down in Cork, are you know, Irish talent building and looking across the entire supply chain. And we have global sustainability leaders working in R&D in Ireland, which is you know, so we have the talent here. We know we can do it. It's ensuring that we have the right levels of support to get that done.
Let me move on to one of your other S's, and that was simplification.
Yeah.
So again, our survey results, we asked our respondents what were the barriers or the inhibitors, and 45%, and this was with respect to credits and grants, 45% of respondents felt that the amount of time consumed by them in diligently following the process was a barrier to them engaging in that process. The process itself, 35% felt was a barrier, and then other issues around the confusion around the myriad of reliefs and credits available. What do you think government could do if you had the magic wand with respect to simplicity?
If I had the magic wand, well, look, I've been on both sides, right? Yeah. So when I was working in a startup, I was the claimant, right? I was the person actually working with an accountant to fill in those and do those claims. And again, it was a complex and arduous process, and the time to get the money back was for small companies, something that's coming back to you in 2 or 3 years can almost feel like fantasy. So I think there's a couple of things. One is increasing the amounts that you can claim with lower burdens, and we've seen some movements in that direction. You know, a better alignment with Enterprise Ireland's innovation grants, so to cover off. So if you've already been approved under one scheme, that you have less work to do. Reduction of that audit window, increase the look back. You know, if we take those comparisons to the UK, I think they're you know, they've been specifically very beneficial for UK SMEs. And look, you know, if I'm an SME, if I can get all my money back in 1 year, right, that would be a huge benefit. So increasing the cash amount that you can get back in year one will, you know, it will benefit everybody, but it will benefit the SMEs proportionately significantly more. So I think all of those things would go to underpinning and strengthening the regime and making Ireland a better place essentially to do business.
And given that the government's R&D strategy Impact 2030, and again called out in the white paper, asks for industry and our participants today to double their spend on R&D, it's really important that we don't sit on our laurels. I think we have a fit for purpose suite, but there is certainly room for improvement, and that's what our survey results showed.
Yeah, and it's getting ahead of the curve. So we've looked at how we've gotten ahead of trends in the past in relation to, you know, investing in various sectors. So this is not just fixing what's here now, but preparing for what it's going to be like in 2030 and beyond.
Correct. Moving on to questions, and again to remind people of the chat function, please pop your questions in. A number of questions here. One, a more macro that I might offer to you, Dermot. The challenge is there a mindset issue? How do we encourage and embed an innovation mindset in Irish economies?
So look, we talk about our mission in IRDG being creating a cross-sectoral culture of innovation. So that goes to mindset. There's a piece where you have to believe in the value of innovation, right? You have to believe in the returns. I think it's problematic in some cases. I think there's probably a skill level piece as opposed to just a mindset piece. So what we know is we know the multinational sector is more productive than the domestic sector. That to me is a management skills piece as much as a mindset piece. So, you know, some of the things that we do and some of the things that we're offering in IRDG is focused on that management training. and showing people how they can do these things. So look, I think people are willing, but they need to be able to see the paths to and be able to take those steps into innovation. And I think it needs to be seen as a core part of every organization. In terms of value produced. So yeah, there's a challenge with mindset, particularly when people are busy. But I think the bigger problem is in relation to the skills and supports around it to enable them to engage in it.
Great. An involved question here, and obviously somebody speaking from a position of pain.
Okay.
We are seeing a delay in revenue reverting on queries and a big delay on EI on grant applications and interim reports and drawdowns. This is impacting business for the existing amount of funding. Do you see revenue, EI, IDA able to handle a doubling of funding into 2030? Any advice for companies? And I suppose I would say in the first instance with respect to revenue, the revenue have an obligation under the legislation to make a refund. There's no obligation under the legislation or indeed in the guidance as to the time frame for that. And that is certainly, I think, a barrier or an issue that could easily be addressed by practice, by making a commitment to the taxpayer to revert in an appropriate amount of time. And that doesn't impinge on revenue's powers in any way, but it does put a service level or a KPI on them, which I think would be warranted. And I think that delay in cash flow or providing the cash refund under a self-assessment system, so the taxpayer is entitled to it and the revenue are entitled to challenge and ask questions, but an inordinate delay is obviously an issue and a pain point for our respondent here. Any experience with respect to EI and IDA and this pain point around drawdowns?
So some, and in fact I was actually talking to Leo Clancy the week before last in relation to it, and one of the things we'll be doing is putting some roundtables together with companies looking specifically at the challenges they're encountering in relation to Enterprise Ireland. So Leo's very anxious to get and understand the challenges that companies are facing. So Enterprise Ireland has ambitious targets. I think privately they want to go well beyond those targets. Sure. in terms, and the only way they can do that is by effectively supporting companies. In this specific case, if somebody's having specific challenges, if they want to come to me directly, just drop me an email and we'll follow up with them directly and see how we can assist. We have very good relationships right across Enterprise Ireland, and sometimes in a large organisation with 800 people, things will get stuck somewhere along the way. So, but if there's systematic problems, we can address them through the senior leadership. I think, look, both organisations are world class in the supports they offer to Irish companies. And obviously international companies in terms of IDA bringing companies in, but they're recognised that as if anybody who's worked with IDA or EI, anybody who's worked with the IDA's EI's international teams in terms of outbound selling will know the value that they can actually bring to a company. So I think, look, it's how we improve our processes like everybody else. Increase the digitalization of the process, measure those processes, and actually explicitly look at what the SLAs are in relation to those processes. Great.
A technical question here. With respect to the new payment system over 3 years, 50%, 30%, 20%, would you expect companies, after having gone through a review with tax advisors, such as KPMG, so thank you for whoever that was, and being comfortable with the detail in their report, would they be in a position to realise the benefit upfront by creating a receivable on the balance sheet and taking the credit against R&D projects? So a technical question. We do have a self-assessment regime here. If you believe and that you've a valid claim, you've done your diligence, you've prepared your basis and met the tests set out in the legislation, I don't see any reason why you couldn't or wouldn't recognise this receivable, just like any other receivable that's well made. The old FIN 48, more likely than not, test is something that we would certainly apply. This is something that we would advise our clients on, and that particularly the multinationals would frequently ask us as to the recognition of this credit, albeit that it's not received. Can they recognise it on the balance sheet? And that's certainly something that we would advise on. Another question, and it's specific to you. It's, hi Dermot, nice to see you. I don't know if your wife wrote that, whatever. What can we do to bring more innovators together? Can you hold events or networking for information sharing?
Yes, so we held a series of breakfast briefings around the country.
And indeed we participated in quite a number of them.
Yeah, so we did, I think we met 150 odd companies in January, February as part of that. We're doing a roadshow in a couple of weeks where we're bringing Magnus Carlsen over from Sweden. So we'll do 2 events in Dublin, 1 in Cork, 1 in Limerick. But we will be doing more and more. So we're setting up and adding to it. So we have virtual sessions and we have in-person sessions, and we continue to do that. We'll do more and more of it. So and I'm looking. I love that inward engagement, right? So we had 50 company supporters when we set up our innovation skill net, which again will add training, particularly in that management side. To companies. So we're always looking for inbound engagement as well. So if that person actually wants to reach out as well, very happy to talk to them about, we'll be putting an innovation advisory group together, which will be meeting a couple of times a year, which will again add to that.
Great. Another question, what countries would you say are our biggest competitors in attracting D&I investment? And I might take that from a tax perspective, and you might give your perspective, particularly given the work you've done on the scorecard indexes. So certainly for FDI investment, a big competitor at the moment we see is the UK. They have a very competitive relief regime. In the spring statement, the Chancellor went to great pains to point out how important that is and their vision for improving that. And as you said, they're very close to us. Similar culture, similar language, great education system. So they are a competitor to be reckoned with. But equally, within continental Europe, the French have a very competitive innovation landscape. The Spanish, the Germans have direct grants, and they're now introducing a credit. The Swiss are, the Swedes are, the South Africans are. So this is a very competitive landscape, and I think national governments see an opportunity to try and get their slice of the pie. So whilst we have a good system here in Ireland, I think it can be improved, as we've pointed out. Our survey respondents feel there are barriers, and we've discussed them. So it's, I think, a lot done and more to do from an Irish perspective, and that's certainly reflected in our pre-budget submission to the Minister as to how they might improve the landscape. But from a more macro, I suppose, into Europe and the European scorecard,
so I take it actually in 2 ways. So the Taoiseach on Monday at the National Economic Dialogue talked about competition for talent, and mentioned the UK, mentioned Canada, mentioned Australia, partly because that's where Irish people frequently tend to leave and go. And great for people to go and get experience, but we want to pull as much talent as possible back here. The other way I would look at it is a large number of Irish companies that are being set up now that will grow and scale in the future, have immigrant founders or co-founders as part of those teams. So the talent we have attracted in over a number of years is now feeding into companies that are growing and being built here. So I think we have traditionally always compared ourselves to the UK, that post-colonial mindset and tethered relationship over many years is a comparison. I'd like to, in a European context, to compare ourselves to some of the Nordic countries, right? Finland, Denmark, Sweden, particularly in relation to their investment in innovation, because that investment will attract talent in, but will also, it will lead to long-term value created in the economy. So I think we have to think about how we bring talent into the country, and that becomes attractive. And we're seeing some interesting spillover effects from some of the multinational companies that we wouldn't have seen up until recently in terms of founding companies. But I think the other piece then is who we see ourselves as peers with. So we almost need to see European peers, or we need to think about Singapore. So at government level, government's already doing some of these comparisons. I think at a cultural level, we have to see those as our peers. And I think that's one of the things we'll do as part of the index going forward, is take a closer look at some of our new peers, or who we would want to compare ourselves against.
And just 3 weeks ago, I was in Singapore with our KPMG Global Incentives conference, and the equivalent of the IDA from Singapore and their Ministry for Finance attended, and were very interested in what other jurisdictions were doing. They're very alive to the opportunity to attract investment. They're very alive to the necessity to compete. They're very curious about how we're dealing with BEPS and global tax reform. So absolutely a real competitor. Another question, and a technical question, I might address it from a tax perspective, and you might be able to give some flavour from what you're hearing. It's something that you mentioned earlier, and it's, we've had a revenue inquiry recently, and the inspector sought to disallow a significant majority of the overheads we were claiming. Is that right? And in our legislation, and indeed in our guidance, well, certainly in the legislation, there's no mention of overheads. What is claimable is expenditure that you, the taxpayer, have incurred on eligible R&D activity. In the guidance in the early years, when the credit was introduced in 2004, the guidance included a whole extensive list of overheads, rent and rates and maintenance and security and canteen and HR and finance, all of those things. That disappeared from the guidance, as you well know, Dermot. We've spoken many times about it. And what reappeared in more recent times is light, heat, power consumed as examples, and nothing else. And certainly our experience, be it right or wrong, that the revenue are consistently seeking to disallow credits on those related overhead expenditure. That's something that we've challenged the revenue on. It's something that you and I have challenged the Department of Finance on. It is an issue. It is something, again, that we're calling out to government to improve. But from your members' perspective, it's certainly something I hear from my clients. Do you hear it from yours?
We hear it all the time. So rent was a big one, and we will continue to push that, because it seems so obvious, right? I think one of the interesting things is when we look in the comparison with the UK in terms of what they explicitly allow in terms of overheads is an important consideration as well. Look, the reality is these things are necessary, and without them you can't actually carry out the R&D. So you're not going to do it without somewhere to base somebody. You're not going to do it without a laptop. In some cases you need to rent premises. In other cases you own the premises. So if you own the premise versus rent it, there shouldn't be a difference. You shouldn't be discriminating, because it's typically the smaller businesses can't afford to buy premises they're renting, but it is an overhead and a challenge for them. So those, and this is this is contributing to some of the challenges that we're having. People are not claiming because they're scared of what will happen if they claim. And these are not just small businesses. I've seen larger businesses don't want to have to deal with the hassle of having to have an argument around it, even though they feel that they're correct, right? It's easier for them not to we'll keep it as simple as possible.
Keep it safe.
So it's discouraging, and we've seen that in the survey there's a reasonable percentage of companies that haven't made claims even though they're engaging in R&D. So why are they not? Sometimes they don't understand the process. Sometimes they are worried about the consequences for them if they make a mistake with the process. So that's why simplification of the process is really important, because a lot of these companies are fighting for their survival, particularly in the early years, and cash makes an absolute and small amounts. So I was chatting to somebody from Microfinance Ireland the other day, and when I was in Storefield, we raised a couple of million in finance. At one point, the 25k from Microfinance Ireland was critical to get us through 2 months, right? So just that little amount of money. So to keep companies alive at that early stage, to nurture them, we need to simplify the process, and we need for them not to be scared. Look, nobody's saying that anybody can write in anything and just get cash back. So there have to be safeguards and things in place, but they can be considerably simplified from a business perspective, and it will make revenue's life easier, I think, as well, as part of that process.
And something over the years that has always mystified me to a degree, but equally when I think about it, I can understand it, and it's exactly to your point, is the mismatch between the number of organizations claiming direct grants from from EI, IDA, UDRUS, and all the other agencies, being in excess of those claiming R&D credits.
Yeah.
And there's no right reason for that. I can understand the fear factor and the issue, and I think, dare I say it as a professional advisor, I think there's a question around taking advice, whoever you take your advice from, but taking advice and relying on that advice and making your best claim. As you do with any other situation in your business, you take your advice and you do what you believe is right. But there is a fear factor, and I think there's a cultural issue there and a tone from the top that we need to examine. There is no reason why you'd be claiming an R&D grant from EI and shouldn't or couldn't claim an R&D tax credit. It's ridiculous, frankly, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and look, and I think the other thing is we're going to have to look at what's claimable. So one of the things that's come up in discussions with a couple of companies recently is around the area of design development, which strictly doesn't fit into the R&D definition in terms of that technical uncertainty, but it's an experimental process to come up with new products and services. It's not allowable right now. It's fairly clearly not allowable, but it's a hugely important area. It's an area we're underperforming in when we look at our European peers, and we were chatting about Denmark earlier. And it's an area where there'll be an awful expansion in high quality jobs over the next number of years. So one of the things we want to do is as well as simplifying some of the existing processes, is look at how we expand and where we go next. You know, it was great, we brought in the scheme, it's great to improve the scheme, but what's next? Right? We're in a continually evolving and changing world, and it's important we stay ahead and not just play catch up in relation to some of these trends.
Thanks, Dermot. That's actually a nice wrap up. Just a couple of thank yous, if I may. Firstly, for all of you for attending and for submitting your questions. If you do have any questions, please reach out to Dermot or please reach out to me directly, and we'll be very happy to talk to you about any issues arising. Thank you for participating. For those of you who did, thank you for participating in our Innovation Index 2023. You will see this again, and for those of you who didn't participate, I'd encourage you to do it. The more respondents we have, the greater the quality of the data, the more impactful it is, and the more we can use it to leverage what we believe is right for the RD&I community. I'd like to thank the team in IRDG, to Dermot and Mary and the extended team, for all their work and support in preparing the Innovation Index. I'd like to thank the KPMG team and the team here in the studio for assisting us with the thumbnail videos, which will be available on the IRDG website and the KPMG website shortly, and for helping us with our production today. Thank you for your continued custom, for your support, for your interest, both on behalf of KPMG and of IRDG, and I'll let you get on with the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everyone.